Derrick Rose had some interesting things to say. And let's take a look at the quote. Talking about him missing time and he's had the knee problems, the ankle problems this year. I think a lot of people don't understand that when I sit out, it's not because of this year. I'm thinking about long term. I don't want to be in my meetings all sore or be at my son's graduation all sore just because of something I did in the past. So that created all kind of reaction. And just a short time ago in Toronto, Rachel Nichols talked to Derrick Rose about his comments.
I was just worrying about myself, just worrying about my future like every player in the league does. And I don't know, I probably just think different. This is only my 7th year, but I think further on into my career, further on into my life, just trying to plan things out. And I think people took that out of term and took it out of content. And it is what it is, but I was being myself, and that's all I could be. So I could care less.
Take issue with what he said?
Of course I do. That was stupid. Derrick Rose, a great player. He's a great kid. Love his mom. That was stupid. You know, Ernie, we're so blessed. I limp around, but I go home to a big old mansion. There's people who work harder than Derrick Rose who go home to a shack. There are consequences to what we do for a living. We got the best life in the world. I'm a poor black kid from Leeds, Alabama, who grew up in the projects. And listen, I don't mind limping around. When I go home, it's a big old house. And I don't even know how to sheets. I got good sheets. I don't know the thread count, but they're good. I got a big old car. I never have to worry about my bills. There are pros and cons to what we do for a living. Derrick Rose is making $20 million a year. He got a couple bad knees. That's disrespectful to maids, people who are in the Army, who go out and kill people and get killed, got no arms and no legs. And listen, as much as I like Derrick Rose, that was just flat out stupid.
Did it bring his commitment in question in either of your minds?
I agree with Chuck a little bit.
Does it bring his commitment to that team into question?
I don't know about that, but I was taught that if you can walk, you can play. Imagine this, Kevin McHale, you see how he walked? Phil Jackson, you see how he walked? You see how Chuck walked? You see how I walk? But guess what? It was worth it.
Yeah, I walk.
It was worth it. It was worth it. So, when you say comments like that, it sort of makes you look soft. But, like he said, he can only be himself. And if that's the way he feels, that's the way he feels. But me personally, if I could walk, I can play.
Well, I think that the context should have been more of, the reason I sit out games now is to help us win a championship.
Thank you.
And then the second part of that is, and that's also going to benefit me later on in my career and after basketball. But to precede it by, it's going to help you first after basketball, leads you to believe that maybe when you were hurt last year and everyone says, or the 2 years ago, that you could have played. So you leave all the speculation. The reason why Tim Duncan sits out and Manu Ginobili sits out and Parker sits out is because they're winning championships. And yes, it will help them in the long run. But basketball is not like football either, Ernie, where there's a difference between a concussion and a sprained ankle. Like you sit out games for concussion, what football guys have, or even Nick Vucevic had last year. Okay, cool. We understand that. That's lifelong. That could be more than just basketball. But they have
let me say
ACL,
this,
they have operations for things that for basketball players.
I walk around and I limp, and y'all make fun of the way I walk. But it was worth it, right? I wouldn't change anything about my life, man. Me either.
Listen, I grew up in Leeds, Alabama, in the projects. I bought my mom a house. I bought my grandmother a house. I bought my brothers a house. I wouldn't change anything about my life. But I'll give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt in the context that he said it. We're taking a part of a quote and not a whole thought process. So maybe he did mean that, but just didn't express it the right way. Because I don't think as an MVP that you could be soft. I don't think as an MVP.
But you heard what he said to Rachel,
No. See, that's my point, Ernie. Yeah. The problem I have, first of all, sometimes we say things that you want to go back. He had a chance to clean it up with Rachel.
But said, if you don't understand, I don't really care.
Yeah, I know. That's what I have a problem with even more.
I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because an MVP can't have a low threshold of pain. It's impossible.
Oh, man. Where do we begin with this clip? All right, so you heard these gentlemen. I use that term loosely. Doing what they do. in this segment of Inside the NBA, in which they covered at the time what were very controversial comments from Derrick Rose. Basically what he alluded to was the fact that he values his body and his life after basketball over the game of basketball. And of course to these gentlemen who have, quote unquote, left it all on the court, gave their whole life to the sport, they were offended by this, I guess what they deemed to be a lackluster, cavalier attitude towards the game. This game which it sounds like they actually worship. Now, of course, it goes without saying that the NBA, the National Basketball Association, which is a professional basketball league of multi-billion-dollar business, has definitely paid them very well. It's definitely lavished them and afforded them a lifestyle that most people on the earth will not be able to attain or enjoy. And so I understand the general spirit of their affinity towards the game. And then you take the dynamic of, where they came from, their background. Now, Shaq came from a military family. He didn't really have the same level of disadvantage that Charles Barkley had, and Kenny Smith was from New York. I don't think he lived a horrible or impoverished life either. But Charles Barkley very, very clearly, referenced his hometown of Leeds, Alabama a couple of times, in his true Charles Barkley repetitive fashion. And so again, you take all of that, put it in the pot, and the gumbo that you get is this borderline worship of the NBA. It's almost like they deify this. I'm so blessed and I have a bunch of cars and a mansion and my thread count, all this foolishness that he's talking about, as if that negates the love that you're supposed to have for your body and for yourself and for your life and for your children. Again, man, I'm not trying to begrudge anybody their opinion. I'm just providing an assessment based on what I observed. And what I observed is a very archaic way of thinking, a very corporate way of thinking, a very brainwashed way of thinking by people who still are paid basically by the NBA. Yes, they work for TNT, but they're basically funded because of the NBA. And so, of course, their allegiance is going to be to the NBA. But what's important to understand is that you have to know that so that you won't become brainwashed into thinking the way that they think, because they would have you think that you're supposed to give your life to a job that could care less about you once your value has diminished to them. So take your own life, for instance, and think about what you do for a living or what you plan to do for a living. Now, short of owning your own business, that means you're going to have to work for somebody else. Somebody's going to have to write your checks. And so that means that they have assigned a certain value to you in the form of your salary, and then any other kind of, bonuses or overtime or what have you. But do understand that as soon as that value has diminished, for whatever reason, they found somebody who can do the job better than you, faster than you, for less money than you, then your value has taken a nosedive. Even think about this. In your contract, for the most part, I've had many jobs. I've seen many, employment contracts. They'll say they can terminate you without due cause, or some similar language to that, to where they don't have to provide a substantive reason for terminating you. They can just terminate the contract whenever they see fit. So you tell a young man, a young woman, that they're supposed to give their life to an organization that has already made it very clear they can let you go whenever they want to, for whatever reason they deem fit. They find a new piece of equipment that can do your job better than you can, and so they say, you know what, it's been a nice 10, 15, 20, 30 years. I know that you're still trying to stack up for your retirement, but take this little severance package and be on your way. Godspeed. And we're supposed to devote everything that we have, sacrifice relationships, sacrifice our family life, all for this kind of relationship with our employer. And so I salute and I applaud Derrick Rose for these comments, for having the enlightenment to understand that he has to look out for himself. And I'm sure that these injuries have provided him that pathway to that enlightenment. And I just think it's really disappointing for these men who are close to being 50, supposed to be elder statesmen, to denigrate this guy like that. I guess, again, I understand it. I get it. They're corporate whores, you know. And I mean that in the most respectful way that you can use the word whore. But, you know, Shaq, of course, we see he's done about 200 advertisement deals with different companies. And, you know, Charles Barkley, he's known to be a mouthpiece to say controversial things. And Kenny Smith, you know, this guy, well, he has knock knees. Nah, I mean, he's a good shooter. He has 2 rings with the Houston Rockets, you know. So I have love for the gentleman. Let's just get into a few of the actual comments. So Charles said that was stupid. You know, he alludes to how blessed an individual is to play in the NBA, and to how much money Derrick Rose is making or was making for that year. And then he does something that I think is really, really shameful, and making a comparison to anybody who's in the military or has a somewhat menial job. And I mean that in the most respectful way, but, you know, menial meaning low paying, lowly respected job, maid, janitor, whatever. And he said he has a couple of bad knees and basically says, so what? Gives a little shrug emoji. And again, man, are they blessed to make that much money just to play a sport? Absolutely they are. Does that mean that they should disregard their bodies and say, to hell with it, I'm going to leave it all out in the court, and whatever happens, happens? I don't think so. Now, if that's the way you feel, that's the way you feel. But you shouldn't project that onto anybody else, which is what I'm really alluding to. You know, feel how you feel. You know, have the type of mentality and approach that you have. But if you have somebody that has a differing approach, let them do them. You know, we claim that we're a country of free speech and freedom to have a certain perspective. But whenever our perspective is contrast or converse to the popular narrative, then we get castigated. Then we get denigrated. Then we get attacked. And it's very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate because you're going to have people who side with you who are going to feel some kind of way toward Derrick Rose and are going to hamper themselves because they pour their life out to a sport that could care less about them. Just think about the number of people who bounced in and out of the league, who have given their life to the sport, who have made some good money, but who can't function in society now. You know, where's the NBA in that case? This brotherhood that people allude to, and, you know, this love that we have for our fellow NBA players. I don't really see that manifested throughout the league to every player, from my vantage point at least. So again, it's important to value yourself and understand your value in whatever marketplace that you're in. Derrick Rose has been fortunate enough to make a lot of money, most of it coming from his Adidas deal. From what I can tell, Adidas has done right by him. They've stood by him much more so than the NBA has, and the NBA family has. In large part, there are still some people who have love for Derrick Rose, but again, you can see the mindset of some of these, what many have called meatheads. You know what I mean? Athletes who just have sports on their brain, you know, and nothing else. They're very short-sighted, you know. But again, you hear Derrick Rose talk about planning for the future, wanting to be there for his son and not be sore, but be able to play with his son and do those things that real men do, which is be fathers, be providers, and be protectors. Now, you tell me who Charles Barkley's going to protect with them 2 bum knees and his bum hip. You've seen the way he walks. And again, this is no shade towards the gentleman, but I'm just trying to make a point. You have to have values in life. And of course, that Charles has his values, and I won't begrudge him that. But again, don't let anybody else's values become your values. Be able to give an answer for the values that you have. Be able to live with the values that you have, and don't let anybody project onto you. Let's move on and go to Ernie. His question now, again, I understand he's the moderator. He has to bring up, questions, but it's always interesting to see how people frame and phrase and contextualize questions. So his question is, does it bring it, meaning his comments, Derrick Rose's comments, does it bring his commitment to the team in question? And so again, I'll give Ernie a pass because he is the moderator, but you can even tell, at least I can, that he has a bias against Derrick Rose for these statements, for his perspective. And then you have Shaq responding to that question, saying that if you can walk, you can play. You see how we walk. Then he pointed out himself, Charles, Phil Jackson, Kevin McHale. It was worth it. And so again, if that's how you feel, bro, that's how you feel. Double salute. That's you. But if that's not how he feels, let him do him. And don't bully people into acquiescing to your way of thinking. It's a very, very dangerous game, man. You have very impressionable people looking at you who idolize you, and we'll get into that. Serving idols, that's a whole different story. But you have people who look up to you and who are going to adopt this way of thinking as their own, irresponsibly so. And it's going to set them back in their life. It really is. It's going to set them back. And so that's why I think it's important to understand your platform, to understand the seriousness of your words and the gravity of your words and the impact of your words. And so again, that's why I'm here. I'm here to be that filter. I very much enjoy being that filter, and I look forward to doing so for a myriad of topics. And so getting back to Shaq, he ended by saying it makes you look soft. And so, we men, young men, old men, middle-aged men, whatever, we have to get out of that mindset, that primitive mindset of looking soft versus looking hard, and understand what it really means to be a man. And in order to do so, we have to have a set criteria for being a man and not have this sliding scale that society gives us. Again, for me, I believe in the God of the Bible, the Holy Bible. It's what I abide by, and it gives a very clear definition of what a man is supposed to be, the kind of rulership that a man is supposed to have in his life and over his family, how he's supposed to walk and talk and think and engage with people, both of his sex and the opposite sex, the kind of mate he's supposed to be with, the kind of children he's supposed to raise, the kind of mentality he should have towards work and towards his treasure on earth and his values. And so once you have a set type of criteria, then you can begin to build and work towards that criteria. But we again have this sliding scale about what manhood is from the beginning of time until now. Manhood has taken many forms and has been transformed into the feminized version that you have now in the world. But there's another problem. It's a hyper masculinity, or a warped view of masculinity, that gets us in trouble as men. To not look soft, to always appear hard, and to not emote responsibly. Of course, you should always be in control of your emotions, but it is good to emote. It's good to cry. It's good to show a passion that turns into anger, as long as you don't let that anger fester. The Bible tells us to not let the sun go down on our anger, so that anger should be quick. We should experience it, we should process it, we should get rid of it and move on. But we should definitely emote. And there's nothing soft about looking out for your own longevity and wanting to be there for your son and your family and to live a long, prosperous, high quality of life after you leave the game of basketball, that doesn't care about you outside of your talent in the way that so again, it's very, very, very important that you have a proper understanding of the world that you reside in. And then you have Kenny Smith. This guy. And I don't know which comment of the three gentlemen that I was more saddened by or disappointed with, but I know Kenny Smith's answer was very, very corporate. It's almost scripted. The term brainwashed pops into my mind when I think about each of these answers, really, but particularly this answer. Basically, what he's saying is that basketball players should put basketball before self. And I guess more specifically, the NBA before self. He goes on to question the validity of Derrick Rose's injury severity and whether or not he actually sat out games that he could have played. And look, man, each man has to decide whether or not he's ready to play. It has to be a decision that you make based on, a number of factors. The value that you think you can bring to that given sport, that given team, that given game. How it will impact you down the road. How it will hurt you as far as your brand. These things aren't absolute, of course. It depends on what you value. But for the most part, athletes value their brand, their money, and their career. And then, some may put value on their post-career, but most are short-sighted. And so again, you have to assess what your values are. And Derrick Rose has told us very explicitly that he values self over the game of basketball. He values his family over the game of basketball. And again, I double salute him for doing so. And then you have Kenny Smith ending his diatribe with a ramble about the injuries of basketball and comparing them to the injuries of football, which made absolutely no sense. Now, yes, you can get a concussion at a much higher rate in the game of football versus the game of basketball, but there are some very dangerous injuries that you can sustain in the game of basketball. Look, man, to thine own self be true. It brings to memory the movie Any Given Sunday. If you haven't seen that movie, I definitely suggest you see it. Not only for this to make sense, but it's a pretty good movie. It's fairly long, about 2.5 hours, but it's a great movie. I used a clip of it in the Habib and Conor video. Actually, I used a clip of Jamie Foxx doing stand-up based on that movie. He was in the movie. But anyway, back to the movie, you'll note that there were a couple of players, namely the starting quarterback. Can't think of his name in real life. I think it was Cap. Name in the movie. I think it was Cap. In real life, his name is Dennis Quaid. And then you have Lawrence Taylor, who I believe, I forgot his name in the movie as well. But basically, both of these gentlemen were veterans. They had pretty much every injury that you could have at their position. Lawrence Taylor played the linebacker. And Lawrence Taylor was having vision problems. What's really sad is that he had an incentive in his contract that would pay him X amount of money if he got, I think, that, something like that, where he was incentivized to continue playing when he definitely should have not played. So in other words, he left it all on the field. He gave it all to the game. And in the end, well, I'll let you see what happens. But again, it just brings home what your their best interest in mind, but they have been so brainwashed as players throughout their careers to believe that they should leave everything on the field of battle, like warriors, and die if necessary, that they had overlooked their own well-being and their own health to sacrifice for the team. Now, while you might say that's noble,